In the dark depths of space above a hostile alien planet, one bounty hunter named Samus Aran was sent to eradicate the greatest threat the galaxy has ever faced. No, I'm not talking about the Metroids, I'm talking about the mysterious, shape-shifting parasite called X. X. The parasite. Though X versus Samus would be very cool. In the game Metroid Fusion, we are introduced to the X-Parasite, a strange life form with the ability to go practically anywhere, clump up into a protective sphere, quickly adapt to extreme cold, take over the bodies and minds of various animals, and even process electronic data. Such a bizarre species could never actually exist, could it? Amazingly, there is one life form that has shown almost all of the properties and ability of the X, and it might be in your kitchen right now. So, to get started, let's look at the first ability I mentioned. The X are able to move between areas at a high rate of speed with ease, even going through incredibly small cracks and crevices. While many animals are very flexible, all are too large and too slow to match the speed and spread we need. Plants don't readily change location most of the time, so that's obviously not it. Those eliminations leave us with 4 other kingdoms of life: fungi, protista, bacteria, and archaea. Looking at the size of the X-parasites as compared to Samus and Fusion, it's easy to see that they are humongous. Their sheer size takes bacteria and archaea out of the picture, but we're left with a question. Do fungi and protozoans even grow that large? As it turns out, they do! Meet Calvatia gigantea, more commonly known as the giant puffball. These mammoth mushrooms have been recorded growing as large as 5 feet in circumference. Of course, protozoans are no slack-offs either. One particularly large slime mold that was found just outside of Houston, Texas, measured in at 40 feet long. That's about the same length as 3 cars placed bumper to bumper. So clearly, both fungi and protozoans have potential to be the size of X. And speaking of slime molds, those are very interesting life forms. They move and grow by releasing tiny little tendrils out of cells outwards, seeking food and a better environment. That type of movement seems to fit the X quite well. The really interesting thing about slime molds, though, is that they are a gigantic group of single cells called protists, working together to act like a multicellular organism. They are a colony organism. Perhaps the X are as well. However, we can't rule out fungi yet. There are plenty of those that behave in a multicellular colony-like manner as well. So let's move on to the next characteristic: the ability to change into the defensive form known as Core X. Core X has a hard, clear shell that makes it harder to get at the softer energy-filled center. It seems strange that the shell has no color or opacity to it at all. Surely that can't be real. Except, it actually is. There is a certain type of fungi called hyaline hyphomycetes, which can basically be transparent, with only a little bit of pigmentation in the fruiting body. Check off another characteristic of the X as potentially being real. Now we have a tougher barrier to overcome. Are there any fungi or protists that can survive in extreme cold for long enough to evolve? It's here that the delicate protists fall away. No species is known to be able to withstand conditions that extreme. In fact, the 40-foot slime mold I mentioned earlier was taken out by a small rainstorm in a few days after it was found. Not very hardy indeed. Surely, you might protest, no mold can withstand cold like that either. Unfortunately, you'd be wrong. A number of studies have been done on the fungus Saccharomyces Cerevisiae, which included placing it into an environment much colder than its natural environment and allowing it to evolve there. In fact, this same fungus can be frozen and reanimated by heating it back up. Clearly, at minimum, this fungus, which is also a multicellular colony-building species, fits the profile of the X very well. Still, we should investigate the rest of the characteristics of X just to make sure. What next then? Ah, yes, mind control. Many of you are probably already aware of the cordyceps fungus family. They are the parasites responsible for creating zombie ants, and are also the inspiration behind the Pokemon Parasect. There is another fungus, however, which can infect people. It can make them hallucinate, undergo sudden changes in mental state, or even develop a fatally high fever. This condition is known as Cryptococcal Meningitis, typically caused by the fungus Cryptococcus neoformans. Cryptococcus neoformans happens to be very closely related to Saccharomyces Cerevisiae, being another colony-building multicellular fungus. The similarities are starting to get eerie. But there's one last characteristic we need to check. That characteristic is the seemingly impossible ability to process electronic data. For anything to do this, it must have a number of electrical pathways available to use as circuits. And the last I checked, mushrooms are not made of metal. So it seems to be a bust. How could a fungus that has no metal parts or even a brain channel electricity? It took a while to find this one, but incredibly there is a way for fungus to conduct electricity. It was only a few years ago that an electronically conductive composite material made partially of the fungus Candida albicans was discovered. The secret ingredient, it turns out, was carbon nanotubes. This probably seems like a huge stretch to say that a fungus somehow evolved with tons of carbon nanotubes around, since those are a man-made structure. But in fact, nature's been producing carbon nanotubes for billions of years, in the soot from fires and smoke from lava. Going back to Metroid 2, the only game that takes place on SR388, which is the homeland of the X-Parasite, we find that the underground caverns contain just what we need: lava, or in this case magma, and a lot of it. There's only one more major loose end here, which is the size of the X-Parasite. If you remember this video about Dr. Mario and his viruses, you might recall me mentioning something about microbes evolving larger in space. The reasoning behind the X is similar here. The planet SR388 has lower gravity and a lower pressure atmosphere because it's so much smaller than the Earth. With less gravity and air pressure to fight, the X would have been able to undergo a form of island gigantism. Only with the entire planet instead of a small island. This also explains why Samus is unable to remove her suit there, as opposed to Zebes, where she could, but I digress. From our discoveries here, it seems like the Saccharomyces Cerevisiae, or a similar species of fungus, could indeed evolve in the caverns of SR388. Evolve into the deadly X-Parasite we see in Metroid Fusion. Near the beginning of this video, I mentioned that the X precursor might actually be in your kitchen. That's because it is an important tool for everyone who wants to bake. Saccharomyces Cerevisiae is best known as yeast. It is really amazing what you can learn if you stay curious, and always use that noggin. Stay awesome.